Prison Industrial Complex by James Braxton Peterson. Illustrations by John Jennings and Stacy Robinson. Introduction. Growing up in Newark, New Jersey, in the 1980s, the specter of the prison industrial complex was omnipresent. Even if I was not always consciously aware of the haunting impact that modern prison systems were making in my specific neighborhood, the consequences of the war on drugs were both tangible and recognizable in my community. The constant police presence, the unstoppable erosion of residential life, and the unchecked violence of an underground economy were uninterrupted features of my youth in inner-city America. As a preteen and later as a teenager, I never connected the dots of policies like the war on drugs, or the economic shifts toward post-industrialism, to the disappearance of neighbors, friends, and family into an aggressive criminal justice system. Like many residents of Newark, I believed that better or more law enforcement was somehow an appropriate antidote to the city's social ills. Then and now, the facts about mass incarceration, policing, and crime can often be counterintuitive. Data on recidivism, the movement to privatize prisons, and the idea that substance abuse should be treated as a public health issue, rather than a criminal justice issue, all were available decades ago, but these ideas were not necessarily a feature of conventional thinking amidst the drug, crime hysteria in the era of crack cocaine. And here is one of the inherent ironies of the prison industrial complex: it can be all around us, and we can intuitively support the policies that make it possible, and yet we may not know all of its deleterious effects on the communities that are most directly impacted by it. Prison Industrial Complex for Beginners is an attempt to demystify the social ironies and brutal outcomes of various government policies, privatization, post-industrialism and the loss of jobs, the war on drugs, mass incarceration, and to introduce and briefly explain how these policies inform what's known as the prison industrial complex. If demystifying the prison industrial complex is a goal of this introductory project, then my hope is that what follows in the upcoming pages, both in narrative and in imagery, will help to unveil for all readers the urgency with which our society must approach the fact that the United States has the highest per capita rate of incarceration of any of the so-called developed nations in the world. Per capita punishment. That awesome fact, the United States incarcerates more people than any other nation in the world, requires all American citizens to ask, why are we the incarceration nation, and how did we become what we are today? Prison Industrial Complex for Beginners attempts to answer these questions and provide some basic insights into the longer history that has shaped our strikingly excessive incarceration levels. The incarceration rate in a given nation, or state, is commonly defined as the number of prisoners per 100,000 members of the population. For developed nations comparable to the United States, the number tends to hover around 100 prisoners per 100,000 people. By contrast, the United States had a rate of 690 prisoners per 100,000 population in 2014, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. That came to a total of more than 2.2 million prisoners. Note, BJ's incarceration figures include all inmates under the jurisdiction of state or federal prisons, as well as inmates held in city or county jails. Imprisonment rates and totals, another set of statistics reported by the Bureau, describes only the prison population under state or federal jurisdiction and sentenced to more than 1 year. These figures exclude unsentenced prisoners, those serving less than 1 year, and those held in local jails. The U.S. imprisonment total for 2014 came to 1.5 million, or a rate of 470 per 100,000 population. The United States does not lead the world in quality of public education, access to health care, life expectancy, or many of the other social metrics that matter to its citizens. Do we as a nation really want to be the number one incarcerator in the world? No joking matter. One thing that national per capita incarceration rates tend to mask is variation by state and region. Some states are worse offenders than others, incarcerating more than their share of citizens who enter the criminal justice system. As I have spent much of my adult life pursuing a graduate degree and working in the state of Pennsylvania, it is there that I have come of age, so to speak, with respect to my understanding of the prison industrial complex. The second of my 3 academic jobs in Pennsylvania was located in the central region of the state. At an academic cocktail party not long after arriving there, a colleague proceeded to tell me a joke. It went like this: what county in the state of Pennsylvania has the highest per capita percentage of black males in its population? He asked. Philadelphia County, I replied instantly, knowing that the county includes the city of Philadelphia, which has the largest black population in the state. Nope, he said. So then I thought maybe the county where Pittsburgh was located had some dense underground population of black folks of which I was unaware. Allegheny County? I guessed. Again he said no. Having lived and worked in Pennsylvania for some time, I was familiar with another old joke about the state, that politically and socially it was like New York, Philadelphia, at one end and Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, at the either end, with Alabama in between. But for the life of me, I could not figure out the riddle of this joke. My colleague finally replied that the county we were in, Union County, in the largely rural central part of the state, had the highest rate of black men of any county in Pennsylvania because of all the state and federal prisons located in it. He proceeded to name all of them. As you might imagine, I did not find his joke very funny. In fact, it required a particular approach to the data for it even to make factual sense. The truth is, there were, and still are, far more black folks in Philadelphia County, located in the southeastern portion of Pennsylvania, than there are in any other region of the state. There are also far more black folks in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County than in any county in central Pennsylvania. But in terms of how we calculate incarceration rates, per capita of the total population, my collegial jokester was right. The county in which we both lived, for all its rural and suburban splendor, housed several prison facilities that boosted the rate of black males in the overall population well beyond the region's general demographic profile. Harsh reality, stark truth. It was at this moment that I decided to visit or volunteer in as many of these facilities as I possibly could during my stay in central PA. And I did. I spent time at the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary just as it was transitioning into a super maximum security facility. I volunteered at the Federal Correctional Complex in Allenwood, as well as other institutions, facilities in the region. I did most of my volunteer work at the Juvenile Detention Facility in Danville, Pennsylvania. What I found would not surprise any activist engaged in the battle to reform or revolutionize the American prison system. I cannot overstate the distinction between donating time to those incarcerated in our penal system versus those who actually have to do time in the system. There is no feeling quite like entering a prison, being searched, going through the metal detectors, and having a series of doors shut and locked behind you. But I was always able to leave within a few hours. Donating time to folks on the inside is an important form of activism in the fight to bring our prison industrial complex to heel, but doing time on the inside is a radically different experience. Few people who have not been incarcerated can even begin to imagine what it's like. What I found in my experiences at the Danville Juvenile Detention Center may not surprise any of the volunteers or activists reading this introduction to the prison industrial complex. The Danville facility was populated by a largely black and brown population of young men, many of them from Philadelphia. These young men were, by and large, engaging, intelligent, and, in some sad cases, consigned to their fate as property of the state. In 2002, when a group of Philadelphia rappers, including Beanie Siegel and the Young Guns, began to promote a brand of clothing called state property, detractors argued that the name suggested the very kind of attitude that led to the overrepresentation of young black men in state and federal correctional institutions. This argument, much like the one that going to prison is a mere rite of passage for members of some communities, misses key points and ultimately ignores the systematic underpinnings of the prison industrial complex. Young men and women from poor, underrepresented communities do not aspire to go to prison. They lack viable job opportunities and are assigned to underfunded, physically decrepit schools. In many cases, they have few options beyond the underground economies of their immediate environment. If black boys, men in any particular community are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts, which they are, and if black people make up 13% of the U.S. population but more than 40% of the nation's prisoners, both of which are true, then certain cultural responses to institutional, and institutionally racist, phenomena will, of course, emerge. Prison is not a rite of passage. It is a conventional reality of black life in America, and it has been so since the end of slavery and ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865. State property is a brand that the state itself created, not the Philadelphia rappers who tried to use it to draw attention to the fact that too many black youth are actually property of the state, even in the 21st century. About a colleagues. The data on institutional biases in our criminal justice system and the prison industrial complex are all quite clear and well quantified by activists and researchers who have focused on these issues for many years. In the midst of writing this book, I was invited to join a panel at the University of Virginia that featured some of these scholars, historians, and activists. Among them were Heather N. Thompson, University of Michigan, Dennis Childs, University of California, San Diego, and Khalil Gibran Muhammad, Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Much as I was excited to join such accomplished writers and thinkers committed to dismantling the prison industrial complex, then, and now, I feel woefully unprepared to count myself among the scholars who do serious sustained work on the history of prisons and the prison industrial complex. Thompson's distillation of the problem in her award-winning 2010 article, Why Mass Incarceration Matters, captures the issue and the critical incisiveness with which all of these scholars engage it. Between 1970 and 2010, more people were incarcerated in the United States than were imprisoned in any other country, and at no other point in its past had the nation's economic, social, and political institutions become so bound up with the practice of punishment. Throughout this volume, you will find that I rely heavily on the work of the thinkers, writers, and scholars who were present at the UVA gathering that day. Finding the balance between their work and writing a primer on the prison industrial complex has been one of the most difficult challenges of this project. But the role of writing in the construction of the prison industrial complex was historically vital, and my hope is that the role of writing, and drawing, in this case, will likewise contribute to the destruction of the prison industrial complex. Reading Khalil Gibran Muhammad's Historical Interpretation of Race Traits and Tendencies of the American Negro, by Frederick Ludwig Hoffman, still gives me the chills. Hoffman was a Newark businessman who published the work in 1896, and it became one of the most influential race and crime studies ever to appear. It was said to be entirely objective, based solely on statistical data and written by someone who came from Germany whose research was uncontaminated by America's troubled history with race. Gibran argues convincingly to the contrary, forcing us to come to terms with the historical subjectivity of statistics and data. The fact is that the numbers we rely on for official proof of all things factual can, and have been, used in racist ways to undermine equality in America. Specifically, they influence Americans in the belief that black people are inherently criminal in nature. This is just one more long-running joke of the prison industrial complex. As depicted in John Jennings's amazing cover art for this book, black folks are believed to have an affinity for criminality in utero. The work by scholars like Gibran, Thompson, Childs, Michelle Alexander, and Toledo LaFloria is some of the most important in this field to date, especially with respect to the historical contours and continuities of violent black oppression meted out by the state. At a meeting of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, USL, in 2015, I had the unique opportunity to hear Professor Toledo LaFloria's acceptance speech after winning a National Book Award from the Organization for Chained in Silence, Black Women and Convict Labor in the New South, 2015. LaFloria's book is an amazing historical chronicle of black women who were exploited in the convict labor system, a thinly veiled front for the continuation of the American system of slavery and oppression after ratification of the 13th Amendment. LaFloria's speech at the conference was impassioned and unabashedly emotional, as she conveyed to the audience how deeply personal the work had become for her, how the stories of black women conscripted to brutal labor conditions in the New South foretold the oppressive conditions of the prison industrial complex in contemporary society. Black women are the fastest growing demographic in the American prison system. Professor LaFloria's tears compelled many in the audience to follow suit. For with knowledge of the long history of the prison industrial complex comes both the frustration of perennial racialized oppression and the triumphant understanding of those who, throughout the course of American history, endured such oppression. As much as possible, and in admittedly brief terms, I have tried to honor that history in the pages that follow. The opening chapter traces the history of the institution originally known as the penitentiary in the United States. Even that term, designating a place where penance might be achieved, belies the awful transition of the American prison system from its original purpose to its current status as a racially biased, privately influenced institution of inhumane, human punishment. In the following chapters, I introduce the major components of the prison industrial complex and the policies that have contributed to it. These include discussions of the war on drugs, institutional and historical racism, privatization, and recidivism. Another important chapter introduces the specific issues of youth incarceration, the effects of U.S. immigration policies on incarceration, and the tragic consequences of solitary confinement. In the end, this collection of topical inputs to the prison industrial complex can serve only as a rudimentary introduction for one of the most enduring and complicated social systems in American society. I can only hope that this introduction, in conjunction with the work of the aforementioned scholars and so many others referenced throughout, will provide a useful roadmap for any readers who might be interested in diving deeper into these and related issues to better understand, and begin dismantling